Welcome to the episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey. You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a regular review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to sit down with Kiel Chenier and talk about Weird on the Waves. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix again. Got a little recording snafu, but today we are sitting down with Kiel Chenier, who has been on several times. So if you haven't listened to the episodes previously where Kiel has been here with us before, go ahead and head back to those episodes and give them a listen. I'll link all those in the show notes. So, Kiel, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, again, go ahead and give them a...
Yeah, no worries.
Who is Kiel Chenier?
So, my name is Kiel Chenier. I make tabletop role-playing games. I've done a lot of stuff for D&D. I've done a lot of stuff for a few other games. A big thing is that I have my own tabletop role-playing game sort of merch, apparel, and supplement store called Birch and Bat Studios. We're at birchandbat.com. We sell t-shirts, stickers. I've got a whole line of gaming PDFs, supplements, adventures, that kind of stuff. All my stuff lives at birchandbat.com. And I've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years now. I've worked for Wizards of the Coast. I've worked for a handful of other role-playing game companies, won some awards. It's been a wild trip. But my big thing right now is I got a new book called Weird on the Waves that after a ton of time is finally finished.
Right. We've been super excited to see it come out because we have an actual play of, was it Return to Pig Island? Is that what it is? Or is it?
The Horrors of Pig Island.
Pig Island, yeah. So
yeah, that's an included adventure in the final book.
Yes, there's it's huge, 200 and some pages, and there's 2 adventures included and a ton of rules. Mm-hmm. So since the last time that you were on,
your book has grown like four times the size.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's this book got huge over the number of years that I had been working on it. Because when I first sort of put it up for pre-order on itch.io, I had naively said that it'll be done in a couple of months and it's only going to be 60 pages and like it'll be ready before the summer. And then several years passed because the book kind of ballooned in scope and got more intensive. And like the more I play tested things, the more I wasn't happy with it and the more I had to sort of expand out. And I also did a lot of work to make sure that it is system agnostic, so that if you run like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition at home, you can use this book. If you run old school games, or if you run Dungeon World or any other game that uses like a D20 and it's like somewhat fantasy based, this book will work for you. Because the rules in it are real simple and it has enough in common with Dungeons & Dragons that like you can make sense of it and it's really easy to port over to your system of choice.
I think when you say it's really simple, I like the idea of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bland. Because like going through the book, it's so full of, I don't know what the right word is, nautical flavor. I don't know how to say it. But like there's lots of evocative artwork and all kinds of stuff in there. And it really kind of channels into the things that make nautical adventuring its own thing, as opposed to just making the ship into a dungeon.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Sorry, a lot of your artwork is from the period, correct? It's like open source?
It is.
Okay.
So except for a few illustrations, all the maps are original. I made those. There are a handful of illustrations of mermaids and stuff in there that I drew. The rest of the art is all royalty-free sort of vintage art taken from the British Public Library collection. Because as it turns out, if you want to find the best resource for old illustrations of mermaids, illustrations of pirates, illustrations of ships, like sailing ships and everything from that era of like the 17th to 18th century, they had tons of it. And the nice thing about that collection as well, lots of monsters, lots of all kinds of like, I was fortunate enough, I didn't want to have this book sort of linger or sort of languish in development hell for another year while I put together, like, basically while I illustrated most of the book myself. That would have taken literally another 6 months to a year. And I was like, no, I can source the art. I can make sure that it looks good and it fits the book, while also making sure that it's finished, this year.
Did you have a favorite weird sea creature you stumbled across from the historical archives?
Oh my God. I was surprised at how much good mermaid art there is. The illustration at the beginning of chapter 3, which is all about the mermaid class. Because in Weird on the Waves, you can play a mermaid from level 1. That is a thing that I was passionate about from the very beginning, is like, no game lets you play a straight up from fairy tales kind of stuff mermaid. And I was like, I wanted to have that in my game. And yeah, the illustration at the front of that chapter is wonderful. It's just this mermaid with a bunch of small fish children, like sort of sitting on a dock, sort of getting ready. It's wonderful and it's charming.
I assumed that was a piece that you had made or had someone else make, because it's very with all the little mermaid children and sort of fish children sitting around. I was like, ooh, that's really cool. But so something that we have found also, because some of the zines that we have made, the artwork from early period woodcuts and that kind of stuff, some of it is so really evocative, and it has this, I don't know, different flavor to it, because those were things that they were, in the moment that they were made, were either scared of or really thinking about because of the life at sea and whatnot. And it has this different sense to it. I don't know what the right word to put to it is, but it's just, and plus that there's a lot of great masters of art from all throughout history that are really, really cool, that art has kind of fallen out of memory for a lot of people. And it's really kind of cool to bring it back into modern times, to be able to look at it and use it for inspiration for things. We talked a lot about artwork and that kind of stuff. Did any of the pieces that you brought along into this sort of change your perspective of what you wanted to create and where you wanted to push Weird on the Waves?
Not especially. It was mostly like the art sort of came after all of the rules and everything were written. It was more a case of like of searching and like digging through archives of things to find art that fit the sensibilities of the game itself. I was just incredibly fortunate that the things that I was writing about of this, because Weird on the Waves is sort of set in a weird 17th century Earth set in the Caribbean. It can be ported over to fantasy systems and like other types of like fantasy role-playing game settings, no problem. But as I was coming up through it and finding all of this art, it was really fortunate that like so much of it in style seemed to match the aesthetic and the feel that I was going for. I was incredibly fortunate for that.
So the world of pirates is pretty far apart. So would you say that this is, not far apart, pretty broad. So at one end you have something very gritty like Black Sails, and then at the other end you have something very sort of, heroic and pulpy, right? So in terms of the spectrum of that, where does Weird on the Waves fall?
Weird on the Waves, as how I run it and how I've... in terms of the advice that I give to wave masters, who are the people that run Weird on the Waves. I
really like that word.
The advice that I give to them, the sort of feel of Weird on the Waves for me is right smack dab in the middle between like Black Sails and Muppet Treasure Island. So it's like you are getting into the nitty gritty of what it was like to be a buccaneer in 1666 and like how survival was tough, how you were... Buccaneers sort of like were the very first sort of independent peoples of that era, who were moving away in loyalty from like the monarchies of England and Spain and France and the Dutch Republic at the time, and trying to make a living and protect their families and their communities and everything on the Caribbean Isles. So there's a lot of sort of historical aspect to that. But on the other hand, there's also monsters and mermaids, and there's this whole brand new world beyond what's called the Border Ethereal, which is this sort of magical shroud of fog that has encircled the Caribbean and sort of like isolated it from the rest of the world now. And there's a brand new alien world on the other side of that. And beyond that, yeah, there are like weird animal people and sea monsters, and like it does get goofy. And I do think that there is more than enough room for a lighter tone to it.
I got to say, Muppet Treasure Island is way underrated.
It is the best pirate movie that has ever been made. No one can convince me otherwise. Pirates of the Caribbean still holds up. It's fantastic. A lot of other, like Captain Blood, like what are some of the other ones? The Buccaneers, several of the Treasure Island adaptations, everything. They're all good. Like you can have some good times out there. Captain Yellowbeard is another one. Muppet Treasure Island is still fantastic.
I think
And it
maybe
captures the Devil May Care goofy vibe of that kind of thing so well.
I think it may be the most accurate reproduction of the actual Treasure Island that I've seen in film. Too.
Oh, the actual book,
it's actually pretty spot on for the story.
Well, they did that one with the Christmas special one.
Oh yeah, Christmas
That's
Carol.
pretty true to the Dickens version too. They're really underrated. The Muppets are awesome. So
oh yeah, no, like Muppet Christmas Carol.
Yeah,
one of the best Christmas Carol versions of it. Muppet Treasure Island, best adaptation of that. Like there's loads of really good stuff that the Muppets have done.
Right on.
Can you talk just a little bit more about mermaids? Because what you've done with them is much more unique than what I've seen other people do with the mermaid.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So right from the get-go, I wanted Weird on the Waves to be a game where you could play a mermaid, where that was like a core character class or race or like character type that you could play. Because a lot of fantasy role-playing games have like merfolk or sea elves or tritons, or basically like a fantasy version that is like close to mermaid, but it's mostly just like a blue or green skinned human with gills or fins or whatever. They can walk on land, no problem. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be real sort of classic with it and be like, yeah, the fairy tale Little Mermaid style mermaids that you remember, and also mermen, merfolk, however you want to have them, those exist in this game and you can play one. I wanted it to be an aquatic type of character who they can swim and breathe underwater. They can breathe air and they can go on land, but again, they've got they've got like a fish tail, so they don't really have legs. They need to be carried places. But I wrote mechanics where a mermaid is basically a mermaid counts as a non-encumbering item. They can easily be carried by other party members. Because again, something that would happen a lot in my games is the mermaid character would get tossed around a lot in combat. It was like, if they had to fight on deck and everything, it was like, okay, hoist our mermaid character up into the rigging with a pistol so they can like fire off at people and then drop down. Because at third level, they rolled on the random mermaid advancement table and they were able to get shark teeth. So they were like this shark-mouthed mermaid character who was handy with a pistol, and they could be like tossed from person to person to take out enemies.
I think there's some awesome, interesting sort of conundrums that could happen in trying to puzzle out the riddle of how do you handle, having a mermaid that has skills that you need to have and sort of managing the trek across an island and that kind of stuff. I think presents some interesting opportunities and conundrums to have to work through. So. Oh
yeah, and just like a mermaid needs to be submerged in salt water for I believe up to 6 hours a day, which again is sort of like akin to sleeping for most other like D&D type characters. But yeah, on top of that, I wrote rules because of the world of Weird on the Waves. Mermaids are created because the ocean is a living thing that is slowly being degraded by some alien force known as the Weird on the Waves. And because of that, it's sort of mustering all it can in terms of sea life to sort of combat humans, because it uses them as sort of like an invasive people. Mermaids are the product of people dying at sea, being washed among the ocean and everything, and the ocean trying to bring them back, but not really knowing how to bring back a human because like mammals are complex and the ocean doesn't understand how human life works. So they end up with fish parts or fish legs. And again, that's where the mermaid comes from in this world. So if you have your character die at sea, instead of just rolling up a new character, you now have the option of playing that character again as a mermaid. You get a few new stat bonuses, you get a few stat penalties until you sort of recover, the same way like if your character was resurrected in regular sort of Dungeons and Dragons. But it gives you a new option for playing characters when your character dies.
It's sort of awesome and terrifying all at the same time. Because like the memory loss that comes along with it that you talk about in the book, it's just there's a lot of really awesome potential there. And then the different abilities that you can roll randomly, I think some of those are really like, it's very much mermaid. I don't know how to say anything other than that, because like the jellyfish hair, I was like, oh God, it's just terrifying in the water. Like there's just so much evocative mermaidness. I don't know,
I'm really glad I captured it. I'm glad you guys like it. Because there are different sort of subsets of mermaids. You can be a stingray mermaid. You can be a blowfish mermaid, a barracuda mermaid, octopus mermaid, like all the sort of like classic variations of mermaid that you see in fan art, that you see in all kinds of stuff. I wanted those to be present in game because like that's really fun. And I figure if you're gonna have mermaids in your game, you got to go all out,
right? Because a lot of them just seem like elves in the water, if that makes and it's just not that's an elf in the water. That's not a mermaid.
This is much more interesting and fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted it to feel very sort of, again, like you're playing a mermaid and that feels distinct from every other sort of fantasy people that you can play.
Right. And then with the table abilities, no two mermaids, or it's very unlikely that two mermaids are going to be the same.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because like by the end, I haven't had it happen yet, but I've gotten to the point while playtesting and running this stuff where I've had players have half of the party was mermaids because over time they were killed off at sea and they decided, well, I'm going to come back as a mermaid. So now half of the crew was mermaids. They were swimming alongside the sloop that they were sailing, sort of looking out for undersea treasure and shipwrecks and stuff, which was amazing. But yeah, it kind of the way where like if you're going to have multiple mermaid characters, I wanted them to feel distinct and interesting or like different from each other.
Right. So this, you mentioned before how much this project has grown as time went by. So how big of an ocean rabbit hole did you fall down in sort of trying to create this?
So much. A lot of it came from early on. I decided I wanted to be set in sort of like a historical setting. Like it's set in 16th Caribbean, right around the rise of Buccaneers. So like Henry Morgan is the sort of like the biggest pirate name around at the time. Same with other really sort of notorious Buccaneers like Diego Lucifer, Charlotte de Berry, Montbar's the Exterminator. And it was also around the time that Alexander Exquemelin, who was this Dutch or Flemish writer, wrote a book called The Buccaneers of America, which is like the tech of the like everything we know about pirates, all the folklore, all the like the yo-ho-ho, the bottles of rum, the like all the folklore stuff that we know of pirates usually comes from that book. A lot of it isn't true. A lot of it he totally made up. But a lot of the things that we sort of believe and assume about pirates come from that. And he was a 20-year-old in the Caribbean writing it at that time. So he's an NPC name. Reading a lot about the history and everything, like I really wanted it to be not just sort of faithful to it, but I wanted it to have a feel that was similar to it. And then as I added more weird stuff like monsters and things, I wanted that to feel distinct from other pirate stuff. The thing that took me honestly the longest was making sure sailing a ship, plundering treasure, and collecting that and getting XP from it and things, making sure those systems felt good to play. Mostly because like I've played almost every pirate game out there and they all either are too simple or they take way too long to do anything.
Yeah.
Like even over the period I was working on this, Wizards of the Coast released their official 5e like D&D pirate thing or like sailing thing with Ghosts of Saltmarsh. And it's a good book and I like it a lot. But sailing using their rules and everything still feels way too complicated and way too time consuming in the moment. So I was really struggling to make sure that like it felt good to play because I didn't want to just release something that was like, yeah, here's my take on it. And it's like just, again, like so many other pirate supplements where it's either way too complicated or just not really fun to play. It wasn't really considered. I feel terrible that it took me that long to do it.
Well, no, I think that there's something to be said, though, for the amount of time, because you can really see the amount of work and effort that went into it. And clearly you play tested a lot because going through the way the ship combat works and stuff, there's enough detail there, I feel like, to keep it interesting and make it not feel like just any other combat, but yet not it's like that sweet spot of things where with a lot of games sometimes they get too complex or they're or it just breaks it down to where it's like, okay, we're gonna roll a couple times and whoever gets better, that's who wins or whatever, and there's this nice sweet spot. And I like the way you've broken it down between like big actions and small actions to where I don't know,
that was a big revelation while I was, because originally it was just like one action per sort of turn and everything, and I was like no, certain things, reloading was the thing that caused that.
Okay.
I didn't have good rules for reloading cannons. And I kept breaking it down where it's like, well, I want reloading to not feel like a chore.
Right.
Because the entire the historical process of reloading a demi-cannon on the sea, super complex and really involved. And like nobody does that in tabletop role-playing games because it would take too long and it's boring, like justifiably so. So it was like, how do I take care of this? Oh, well, I just break up actions into big actions, small actions. You get 2 on your turn. Use the small action just for reloading. That way it's like, okay, cool. You're able to do it on top of attacking. Like that way when you're in combat in like on the ocean and everything, it's not like, okay, one character has the guns, one character has the wheel, one character is taking care of repairs. Because if you're stuck repairing the ship over like several combats, that gets boring. It's like, oh, I'm just, we're not getting hit, so I'm stuck doing nothing.
Right.
No, on every turn, everyone can attack. Everyone can move towards sailing the ship. They can do whatever they want in the moment, instead of it being like assigned positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's always good when you can come up with a fix like that that doesn't involve, you know, 5 additional rolls. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Like I think Weird on the Waves is a fairly complex system. There's a lot of rules and a lot of nitty gritty, again, things to handle the nitty gritty of interacting with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still light enough that it's not like too cumbersome, I feel like. The good sweet spot for me was like, does this feel good to play with simple games as it does with like 5th edition?
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I hit it.
I definitely think you have, because going through things and looking at it, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's got enough. It's nice to have systems that have enough robustness to where they can add to the game, but not suck the whole life out of it.
Right.
And that's a hard spot to hit a lot of times, or just not make it feel like you're borrowing from another system that is already doing something else. So it's like, oh, yeah, this is dungeon crawling on the ocean or whatever. And I really feel like with the, I don't know, just the amount of different systems and mechanisms you have working here, that this is very definitely its own world and own thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm super excited.
The thing I really struggled with was so many nautical games, they assume a certain level of like physicality. Mm-hmm. Like you have to play this on a map. There's positioning, there's angling. You have to pay attention to the direction of the wind, or you have to like, oh, if your ship moves more than 180 degrees at a time, you need to take that into account.
Right.
And I realized a lot of those things are way too hard or almost impossible to play in theater of the mind.
Right.
So like if you're playing online with friends and you don't have access to like a literal map in front of you, or it's harder to use those with digital tools, this game wouldn't work. So I had to simplify things and change things enough so that even if all you have is an audio connection to your friends online and a bunch of dice and the rules, you can still play and not lose track of like, well, how far away is that ship? How many miles is it to this place we're going? How do we keep track of it? I tried to make it as just simple enough that it can still be tracked that way.
Right on. One of my favorite things that I've found so far going through all this is that the wave dice, is that treating the ocean as a living thing that sometimes is so immense that it's actively working against you. And while the mechanism is very simple, it really, I feel like an additional D6 really changes things and makes it feel like the ocean really is this powerful thing, because a D6 is actually, +6 on a D20 is pretty significant, right? So where did the idea come from for that? And
so there's like wave, wheel, and woe dice, right?
Yeah. So Weird on the Waves for Wave Masters, which is like the game master equivalent in this game, instead of adding set bonuses and things like a +2 or a +1 or advantage or what have you, Weird on the Waves gives the players in the Wave Master a bunch of dice. Wave Masters get wave dice. They're a D6. You get a bunch of them every session. They're basically, you add them to D20 rolls. So basically, if the Wave Masters are, their position is to be the ocean itself. Anytime that the players are sailing along the seas and doing whatever, the Wave Master takes up the role of the ocean that is working against them. They control the weather. They control the literal waves themselves in terms of sailing. They control the sea life and the monsters and everything within it. They have to sort of take up that position. And that position is very antagonistic towards human life, because the sea wants you dead. Or if it doesn't want you dead, it doesn't understand you and it wants you out of the way. It wants you off of its water because you're a disruption. And so they have wave dice in order to influence the sea's sort of impact on the world. So anytime the sea really wants to accomplish something as you, the wave master, you add a bunch of those D6s to your roll. Another thing that comes up is woe dice. Woe dice are I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It's been a hot minute since I have played this. Woe dice are a D10. Anytime the players roll a natural 1 or they screw up in a major way, the wave master gets a woe dice. They roll it. It's a D10 table of sort of improvised bad things that the sea conjures up to work against them. That can be anything from disease to sickness to tragedy, loss, betrayal. It's all these sort of one-word results that can be used in a variety of ways. like there's one result called unbalance. And depending on what they're doing, like if they're in the middle of the sea and they're sailing and you roll a woe dice and it comes up unbalanced, maybe someone gets knocked overboard, someone who's important. Maybe the entire ship gets knocked to the side and capsizes. If they're on land, maybe there's an earthquake. If they're in the middle of negotiation, maybe suddenly something comes up that sways things to their enemy's side. It's broad enough to be applied to any sort of interaction or encounter. Then on the opposite side, there's wheel dice, sort of WEAL. It means like something good, a groundswell of positive influence. Wheel dice are accumulated when characters roll a natural 20. You get an extra D12. That D12 can be held onto and added to stuff. It basically is like a good bit of fortune that comes with rolling a critical hit. So like anytime you really need to succeed on something, if your players have them, you can spend your wheel dice, roll a D12 and add it to whatever you're doing. Damage, attacks, sailing, skills, whatever you need.
That's really
because I wanted a level of random stuff to happen in the game.
Well, it's really evocative of that setting, too, the whole idea of good fortune and bad luck in conjunction with sailing. So it adds to that element of the piratiness, you know?
Sort of captures the superstitious feel of treating the...
Right, exactly.
Like, there's all this stories and stuff of sailors feeling like the ocean was actively working against them at some point sometimes, and all the superstition that comes along with that. I feel like it does a really good job of sort of capturing that feel of treating the ocean like a personified thing that's trying to bring weal and woe to you, actually. So
yeah, that's definitely the vibe that I wanted to go for. I'm glad it kind of rings true with the game because I worked really hard to make sure it does.
Yeah, well, and just as I go through all of what you've done in general, it seems like anytime you add a system or a fiddly bit, it enhances the flavor and theme of the game, which I think is kind of the sweet spot for where you know, if you're adding things, it needs to enhance and not just be extra.
Oh, totally. And again, thank you. I'm glad it does. Because yeah, that was definitely the goal. Like if I made a system for the game, I really wanted it to come back to the core idea of the gameplay of like you're playing pirates. Yeah. And if you're going to be pirates on the ocean, you're immersed in sort of that piratey world, and you got to watch out for the things that affected pirates in history. Like there's a whole series of mechanics for getting sick. Because again, the things that if cannonballs and being marooned and sharks and other stuff didn't kill your pirates or your characters, things like scurvy or dysentery or yellow fever or things would. These were constant problems in the Caribbean and the West Indies at that time. So yeah, I wrote a bunch of mechanics for like what happens if your characters get sick. What can you do to solve that? Well, of course, because you can use Dungeons and Dragons with this game, there's magic. So if you have like a restoration spell, that'll do the trick. But for other games or for games where like you don't have those spells or things, there's also medicine. There's also bed rest and everything. You have to take the time in between voyages to rest up or else it's going to get worse for you. But there are also like sea witches spread throughout the Caribbean Sea who make different brews and tinctures and potions and things that will help combat some of these things. I've also included a bunch of more fantastical sort of diseases and ailments to go along with this. Like there's sea pox, which is just like a terrible, like almost barnacle-like boils that you can get on yourself when you're exposed to sea monsters and things. You can contract that. There's also a disease called Tentacular Madness, which is when you're exposed too often to the weird on the waves and the magical forces there, you can slowly go crazy and start to see things that aren't there. And you begin to like, the sea begins to take hold of you and you can slowly become like essentially like an agent for the ocean itself. And you slowly turn against your friends.
Very good. So you mentioned in your book about some of the inspiration being the color out of space. And so that Tentacular Madness is very much on point with that. So there was one thing I will say to that is that like Lovecraft wasn't a huge inspiration for this book. Because I feel like if you're going to go with like sea monsters and like things that come out of the waves and stuff, Lovecraft is a really easy thing to go through. The color out of space, though, was huge because it really captured that like something has invaded our world that we can barely perceive
but it has this slow sort of sickening influence over all of us. And you don't notice it until it is far too late.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not immediately terrifying. It's sort of, insidious in its nature.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's also like I like the idea of like the ocean being similar to like it has been made sick by something like that, something that came from somewhere else, an alternate dimension. And the ocean is trying to fight that off. And in doing so, it's producing sea monsters and it's producing mermaids. And it's like basically drudging up like a living organism would have antibodies. So too, the entire ocean is a living organism that is trying to like push back the things it perceives as threats, and that's mostly sailors and pirates and things.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the ocean itself is completely hostile to people. Like, we can't live in it. You can't stay in it for too long because of the level of the salt in the water. You can't be underwater for too long because you'll drown. Like, the idea of it just being completely hostile environment in the way that Color Out of Space kind of conveys that as well. You know, it's just, I don't know, it's an interesting theme to bring in there to sort of bring out the terror that is the ocean and like sort of the immenseness of it and how it just goes on forever, essentially. And I feel like because it's been around us for so long, we treat it with sort of this, I don't know, this just like we understand it. It's very plain and it's just this thing that's there instead of it being really conceiving how immense and mind-boggling it actually is.
Yeah, the ocean is something that when you play Weird on the Waves, it's something you always keep in the back of your mind because the Wave Master represents that ocean. They are always sort of like, if they're not actively working against you, the world itself is. So it's something to always keep in the back of your mind when playing is like, oh, we can't forget about this, or we need to be cautious of this over here because like any day now or any moment now, something bad's going to happen.
Right.
Like misfortune will fall upon us and the sea is going to come for us.
So this has grown to 244 pages from what you had initially started off with. And I got to say, in going through it, there is no fat in this book.
Yeah.
Like, every bit of it is unique and adds flavor to it. Lacey mentioned before about how all these unique little systems that are in there. I don't know how you crammed so much. Like, there's no fat. Like, so was that an intentional? Like, I mean, not to say that you would cram, fluff into a book, but like a lot of art role-playing books, they, there's great systems in them, but they just sort of kind of get a little bloated, as time goes by. And this, there's just nothing to trim away here that doesn't cut off a major part of the setting.
Well, so the current version of it, like version 1.0 of the book and everything right now is, I had to basically release it as it was. When it finally got to the point where the rules were complete, I was like, okay, I have to ship it. This has been in production way too long. If this had gone on for another year or so and everything, like there probably would be a little bit more fluff in there to just like, not even so much pad it out, but to just like fill in the gaps of the world a little bit better. But I do think it actually works better because it is just rules, enough flavor text to give you an idea of like what the world is and what you're experiencing when you play these systems. And like all of the rules double as world building. Right. All of the world building doubles as mechanics. All of the art doubles as like things you can immediately see or show to players to make them understand the size and scale of things. Like I used a lot of illustrations of ships the way that I did to be like, hey, these are what these ships look like. Here were the parts of them. Now you have a better idea of like what sailing is like. Because when I say, oh, you need to make lookout checks from the crow's nest or the top of the ship. That's sort of like, what does that look like when you're actually on it? What does the gun deck on a ship look like? I made sure there were illustrations of like cannons and a gun deck and everything to make players understand here's what that space is. So like, yeah, every part of the game is sort of pulling double duty as both world building and mechanics.
I feel like I don't know, there's a lot of lessons to take from that. I think that in that you can make those things so much more concise, and I feel like they cut even sharper because they're doing double duty. So every time you mention something in the game, it's sort of it inspires me in running games to make sure that all of the things that I'm mentioning are pointing towards the same themes and tone.
Yeah, I'm really glad that it works out that way. I put a lot of work into making sure that it does. Like a lot of the world building about the setting comes from items, comes from the cargo that you can come across, the random encounters. Because I didn't really flesh out the hard details of the history and like where, like one thing I make a point of in the Wave Master section is to be like, as a wave master, you don't need to know with 100% certainty who was in charge of what on which islands.
Right.
Like, what territory did Spain have? Well, they own these islands at the moment, but a lot of that was in flux in that time period. Like, rulers were changing hands a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to not know. And it's okay with making a certain amount of things up as you go. And here's the tools to do it with. You can get certain things, like it's nice to strive for some of that accuracy, but it's not necessary. It is only as necessary as you want it to be. Just because otherwise, like, I was driving myself crazy making this book to be like, oh, I got to make sure I know exactly like how the history lined up on this and who was alive when and how they influenced the world. And I need to make sure these characters are present. And it's like, it got to be too much.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ultimately it didn't end up being important to players. And so if it wasn't important to play, I ultimately didn't include it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like it would have just taken up too much space in a book that would have been like, glanced over.
Right on. So now that this is all done, is how much of a weight, accomplished? Because this is the largest project you've ever sort of undertaken, right?
This is I think this is the biggest project I've ever worked on. It's also the one I've put the most design work into.
Right.
I tell a lot of people I'm an adventure writer. I like writing stories and dungeons and like places to explore and adventure in. Like, that's my bread and butter. It's what I do best. I like to think I'm a decent game designer, but this is the biggest project I've ever done, making a game and essentially like making rules and making mechanics and stuff. This is the most intensive thing I've ever done.
So do you think do you think that in all of this stuff, or how big this project has gone, and you said before mostly what you had done is adventure design, has this changed your approach in terms of the way the scope of this has grown? Has it changed the way you're going to approach the next project, perhaps?
A little bit. I definitely think that after completing this and the 2 adventures previous that I had done, Parallel of the Fat Prince and Icor Knight, thinking back to a lot of stuff I did before, like all these projects have shaped me as a designer and writer now. I've matured a lot. I've gotten I've started to write with a much more inclusive and a much more considered approach than how I used to when I first started. And that's just out of like respect to the reader and respect to like a broader audience,
right,
that I'm trying to approach with this kind of stuff.
Right on.
Because I used to write like really niche and really gritty sort of RPG kind of stuff that was basically for myself and for my friends and like a small amount of people. Now I want to try and write stuff that's still really unique and still very me, but also to be a lot more inclusive and a lot more sort of open to a variety of players.
Hell House Beckons
Weird
will
on
always
Ways
be
is the
one of
kind
my
of
favorites.
game. Hell House Beckons is still real good. Eventually, at some point, I'm going to update that book with some new art and some new, basically like smooth it over, because that's
right.
Reading over Hell House Beckons now, I think there's still a lot of good there, and I still think it's a really good adventure, but I definitely read it now with like a more experienced eye, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
oh wow, I really did write that in 2016. That was a different time.
Right.
So one thing we haven't talked about yet is that fabulous art poster that is on your page. Tell me about that, because that is truly wonderful.
So that poster was done by one of my favorite fantasy artists, Grey Wiz, who runs Mysterious Path. He's the lead artist and layout designer for Break, an upcoming RPG from Reynaldo Madrinian, who I'm friends with, and like I've been following their stuff for ages now. Gray did a really good poster for me when I first released Blood in the Chocolate. And it's based on the original 1970s Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory poster, just using the characters from my game in that poster. And he did an amazing job with it, and it's very anime, and it's very fun. And when I started Weird on the Waves, I approached him and be like, hey, would you be willing to make a poster of Weird on the Waves using a similar movie poster style? Like, I took the film print poster for a movie called The Pirate Movie, which is a very sort of ho-hum, like jaunty 80s or like late 70s, early 80s romance movie kind of thing. It's not especially good, but it had a really fun poster. And I was like, would you be able to do something similar with Weird on the Waves with this? And he did. And that's basically what that poster is, except his version is so much better. It's got this like Because when I did my original concept sketch for it, it was one of Weird on the Waves' iconic characters, Sonny Jim, sort of wrapped up in a pirate flag with a sort of the Shape of Water fish man. Because that was probably around the time that the Shape of Water was a really big movie. And he drew a version of it and it was okay. But then he drew another version after it that was this huge-eyed goldfish man who was like super buff but had this adorable goldfish head. And he nailed that poster so good. I was like, oh my God, that is way better than what I had originally conceived. It's incredible. He finally got the final version of it finished around the time the game was ready to come out. So I've used it in promotional materials. I adore it. It's just colorful. And it's like, if I have to point to people to be like, this is the kind of vibe and the feel I want the game to have, I point to that poster and we're like, Weird on the Waves is like this.
Oh, I was just, I really liked the picture, and it's got kind of, you first, when you look at it and you kind of drawn to that middle picture and it looks very wholesome. It's got the guy, he's kind of blushing, and all that. But then the more you look at it, you're more like, oh, what's going on in the background over here? That looks a little,
There's all manner of pirate characters. There's tentacles coming in from the side. It's like, it takes place on a pirate ship at sunrise. It's great. But yeah, at the same time, like this is the game I came up with. It's like, if you want to romance the fish man of your dreams, like you can do that in this game. Like that's the kind of game that I would love to play in. So I'm like, I'm gonna make sure that you can do that in this game.
So we have a joke around our table. It's always run the games that you want to play. So it's sort of the same thing. You always design the games that you want to play, right?
I mean, that's kind of the way I've been incredibly fortunate in sort of my what my amounts to my tabletop game career, I guess. Every project I've undertaken and done has always been something that I wanted to make. It's something that I wanted to have at my table, something I wanted to play, a game or an adventure, something that didn't exist, but I wanted it to. So I decided to make it. That's kind of how I've approached making stuff so far, because I'm not super good at chasing trends. And I'm trying to keep up with stuff more now. But a lot of times when I make games and I write adventures and stuff, it's mostly like, if it tickles my fancy and it's something I really like, I'm going to make it. Now I'm just also making things that it's like, I sometimes go beyond that and be like, well, what would other people enjoy too? How can I get the best of both worlds in there? Right. So that it's something I will dig and my friends will dig, but also like a broader audience will also be into it too.
What are the odds of a print version or print on demand version of Weird on the Waves? Have you looked at that at all, or?
A little bit. It's something, I'm not going to make any promises about it because right now the main deliverable has always just been PDF.
PDF, yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a print on demand version. Knowing the kinds of quality that comes out of a lot of print on demand places, I don't think that's something I want to pursue. I think if there is going to be a print version of Weird on the Waves, I'm going to handle it in-house. I'm likely going to make a version of this book that would work as a print version that I'm going to have warehoused and sold from our store at Birch and Bat.
Right on.
If just because I think that then I can guarantee the quality of it. Right. And I can guarantee something that's going to look good and feel good, because print on demand is a really good option, but it involves working with a lot of businesses and a lot of sites that I'm not working with anymore or working with as much.
Right.
So far, not in the works, but never say never. It might be something that happens eventually. Right now, I've got other stuff on my plate right now, but it might be something I look into in the future.
Well, are there any other...
Yeah, speaking of other stuff on your plate.
Like what else do you have that you're working on that you can talk about, or...
Nothing that I think I can talk about right now. I'm going to have hopefully a new PDF at birchbat.com, some free resource stuff. That's what I'm sort of working on right now that we have our new .com up and running.
Right.
I'm going to work on a lot more sort of free resources and stuff, like adventures and supplements and things that you can get for like free, just to download from the site. I'm also working on some new products for the store. I'm at the point now where like I'm just sort of like keeping up with a lot of it. I have a lot of ideas and a lot of projects I want to work on, and the next year or so is going to be really interesting because I have no shortage of stuff that I want to make for the store.
Right on.
So there's definitely going to be a lot more from me in like by the end of 2020 and into 2021. Nothing concrete yet, but I'm going to try and make a lot of really cool sort of like system agnostic D&D adjoint or adjacent sort of fantasy role playing kind of stuff that you can use with any system you want.
So finishing Weird on the Waves and the way that project grew, has that pushed you like closer towards or further away from wanting to do larger projects like this again?
Oh God, I would definitely say it's pushed me away from it a little bit. Because again, like it was an undertaking that was far too big for me to handle on my own, and at the same time, like manage on my own. I will say this: I'm going to focus on a lot smaller stuff, basically from now and probably the next year or so. Like smaller PDF supplements, like things that you can get for either low cost or free.
Right.
If I go in on something this big again, I'm going to do it a lot. I'm going to do it very differently so that, again, customers aren't going to be waiting on it until it's finished. Like I'll probably work on a lot of stuff on the side. And then when it's done, that's when I announce it.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, I got to say for where the project grew and sort of what the final what it has become, there, you can definitely see that the amount of time and effort that you spent putting it together and getting it out was definitely time well spent, because to go from 60 pages to what it is now, it's just, I'm inspired by. I'm actually hoping we're going to game later today, and I kind of want to take this downstairs and hopefully maybe convince some people we can get it to the table today. So,
we read through it. You can have some really good pirate times in it. But yeah, I'm glad it's inspiring, and I'm glad you think it's worth it, because like as a creative person, everything, like I had tons of doubts throughout it. Like I think anyone would, because it's like it was a huge undertaking. But I put a lot of work into it, and I made sure that it's internally consistent, and that it's at the end of it, I still feel like it's a book that I can be proud of to a certain extent. And I really do hope people like it. I think it's worth people's time, and it's worth people's money, because it is definitely my take on like pirate adventuring, and it does what I wanted it to, and it fills a need that I think was there. So I hope people like it.
I definitely think they will, and I think it's a very different take on the pirate and sort of ocean adventuring, I don't know, genre or whatever you want to call that, of gaming, that it treats it in a very different way than any other sort of D20 supplement I've seen has previously. So I'm all about it. I like it a lot. I think it's going to be a good time.
No, I'm really glad.
So, all righty. Well, for anybody else out there, where would they go to find you, or where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out to you?
Oh, absolutely. You can find me first and foremost on Twitter. I'm at Kiel Chenier, just at KielChenier. You can also find my blog at dungeonsdonuts.tumblr.com. But most of all, you can find all my stuff, the RPGs I make, because I work on stuff, all at birchandbat.com. I have a podcast now with my partner, Arella. She's one of the lead designers and apparel creators for Birch and Bat. She and I have a podcast together called Breakfast with Birch and Bat. It is a morning tabletop role-playing game show. We talk about our experiences making stuff, different games we've run, basically anything that's sort of like catching our attention at the moment when it comes to games. We're still fairly new. We got a few episodes up. But it's a really fun show to produce, and it's basically me and her just talking about like all our favorite stuff that has to do with like role-playing games.
Right on. So we'll put links up to all those in the show notes. I got to say, Birch and Bat is way more than just a role-playing site. I know we talk to Kyle a lot about role-playing games, but I know Lacey's got a pair of tights from there and a lot of other stuff. So
nice.
It's the only place I know where you can get fabulous D20 leggings and a PDF to play later in the same place. So
if you want apparel and other stuff, like it's fantastic.
All righty. Well, I think thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I think this is I'm super inspired, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I really think that if you want something different for your table, it's be super awesome. I'm excited to do it. So, right on.
Yeah, I can't wait to play this with you guys at some point.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us, Kyle. And
thank you.
I think that'll do it for us. And we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.